But yeah, just to get a bit of context and everything, like,
Mm.
what was your build up to being in Bloc Party? What you up to before that type thing?
I had been to college and I'd graduated. This was like 97, and I'd started like a graphic design job basically. I was um living in sort of in Reading, and I had this graphic design job, and I guess I was probably about 21, 22, and I was just like, this is going nowhere. And I wasn't meeting anyone in Reading because I was actually working like out in the countryside, and I was just like, I need to form a band. It's time because I'd played for a few years, but it'd been a long, I'd never actually kind of put a band together. That was my ambition really, was to play with people. So yeah, I can't remember exactly what the timing was, but it would have been about 2001, 2000, 2001, and I was looking in ads. I saw the ad that Kelly had posted
Okay.
in the back of the NME. Yeah.
And had you always been into the bass at that point? Had that been your instrument type thing or not really?
Um, yeah. My brother played bass, so he had a bass guitar, and I used to just go in his room and like steal it basically when he wasn't around, and I would just practice and play on it. And I honestly don't know what it was that attracted me to it particularly. I mean, it's where I hear melodies anyway, kind of in that low end. And I know that I thought that Nicky Wire was cool. That was an important thing for me. Um, I was a big Mannix fan, and yeah, I just thought that's the thing. That's the thing I want to do. Um, yeah, and no looking back really when I sort of got into it.
And what was it like growing up in Milton Keynes in terms of like going out and watching live music type thing?
Oh well, there was nothing back then. We used to go to Northampton. There was a club called the Roadmenders. I saw, yeah, I mean, I saw some great bands there. I saw the Manics on the Holy Bible tour, for instance, the Roadmenders. But Milton Keynes, we always complained was like there was nothing there really. It was just kind of a cultural wasteland, and so we had to drive to watch gigs. I mean, it's changed now. You've got the Crawford Arms now, um, but back then it was, yeah, it was just. I remember the 90s as just kind of like top 40 nightclubs, and for anyone my age, it was about the music press and the radio, and these were your kind of um routes into other worlds, because we weren't going to meet those people in the suburbs particularly. And again, I didn't it wasn't till later that I'd been to college, finished college, was working and able to travel into London, that I kind of was able even to like hook up with other musicians.
Yeah, yeah. So were you in any bands then before Bloc Party type thing?
No, this is the strange irony about my story, is that I'd in college I tried to put a band together and failed, and I didn't even have my own instrument at that time, so I thought I'll be a singer or something. And I think I put an ad in the NME myself, like when I was still at college. And I remember we didn't have a phone in the house, so this kind of dates how old I am. The student house was before mobile phones, so I had to go to a phone box to reply to messages that had come in.
All
And
right.
um, yeah, it was no, we had a phone you could only dial in on, you couldn't dial out on. So
Okay.
my flatmates would get messages saying somebody's replied to your ad, and I'd have to go to a phone box to reply. But it just never worked out.
What did your ads look like out of interest? What year?
I know
What were the details?
I would have mentioned Joy Division, I think. Like that was my 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 big bands when I was at college and just afterwards were Joy Division, the Manics, and later I suppose kind of Sonic Youth, and I remember Joy Division was the thing. And I mean, one story about me is that like I discovered Simple Minds when I was 13, inexplicably, and decided this was going to be my band. So I listened kind of only to Simple Minds for like three or 4 years as a teenager. But those early Simple Minds records, like the second record, the third one, which is Empires and Dance, um, I still think they're great records, and the bass playing is amazing on those records. So that was definitely like a big influence for me. I wanted to channel a bit of that sort of post-punk, Teutonic, like kind of groove thing that they did, and obviously Joy Division had a bit of that.
Yeah, yeah. So what intrigued you about the advert from Kelly then? Can you remember? Was it some of the bands that were mentioned type thing?
Well, funnily enough, I actually there's a guy who's been in touch with me called Salim, who's writing a book about this whole time. Just got in touch with me last week, and he said, "Oh, I found this is how good my research is. I found the letter that you wrote to the NME in 2001."
Wow. Okay.
And he showed me a screenshot of it, and I was like, "This is amazing. Well done for getting that letter." Which incidentally was about Moby, but we can go into that.
All right.
But I said to him, if you know where you're looking, I could probably get you to find the ad that Kelly posted, and he actually did find it. He sent it to me today, and it had Trailer Dead, and you know, by the Trailer Dead, Sonic Youth, um, Long Pigs, which was the one band that I was not really a fan of particularly, and what else was on it? I mean, I saw it earlier on. Um, Smashing Pumpkins and somebody else, and it was kind of like Trailer Dead had become a thing. Like by 2001, I was like, that's the kind of energy I want to tap into. They used to smash up all their gear and they were quite crazy. And Sonic Youth just for the sort of melodic qualities. Yeah, so that those were the bands, and he was looking for an energetic bass player and drummer at that point. I was like, I reckon I could do this. And yeah, the irony is that that was the first time that I'd replied to an ad. Uh,
Wow. Okay.
and it turned out to be Kelly. And I remember I met him like it was in Chingford. We used to rehearse at Russell's Grand's house. She lived in Chingford. We used to catch the train up there. I mean, I was still in Reading at this point, so I would catch the train, go around the circle, get to Stratford, get the overground up to Chingford. So it was like quite a big round trip for me. But yeah, we would rehearse in Russell's Grand's front room, and it it seemed. I mean, I'm not sure if it actually really clicked straight away, but that they definitely had something. These two guys. I mean, they were both very shy. I mean, I was fairly shy as well at that point, and they were. Russell always did his talking kind of through his guitar, really. Um, and yeah, and Kelly was just quite meek, and but they had this interesting interplay, and I was quite interested in how I could sort of fit into that. Um, and I think that's sort of how the band went in a way. It's like me always trying to find a space sort of between them, or sometimes follow one or the other. And of course, later when Matt came in, that sort of really transformed it. But yeah, melodically, it was very interesting, and I think I could do what they were into. They were into sort of like chordal parts on the bass, and I could do that. I was into that. I mean, another band I was really into around then would have been Mogwai. The bass playing in Mogwai was quite sort of, that much more sort of chordal, heavy style, and yeah, it just seemed to it eventually clicked. I mean, I think for a while I wasn't totally sure, but I had nothing else going on at that point apart from working 9 to 5 in a out of this garage in rural Berkshire. So I was like, I'm going to just stick with this because it's it will turn into something, or we'll all get bored. It'll something will happen with it.
Yeah, yeah. And did you get much direction from Kelly in terms of your bass playing, or did you just kind of find something that worked type thing?
Yeah, I mean, he continued always to be very particular. There was always some scope for room. Sometimes he would say, "Look, I'm looking at these root notes. Can you start here?" My attitude was always like I would play the first thing that seemed instinctive, and sometimes that would be great, and we'd go with that. And sometimes Kelly, you could tell, he'd be like, "Yeah, that wasn't quite what I was thinking," but he often he had he would give you references, so he would play songs to you or mention things. And he would just go, I was thinking something a bit like this. And he'd put like a DJ Shadow song on or something. And I'd listen to that and go, I don't know how that fits with this song, but I'll try and approximate it. And that went all the way along. And I can think of, writing to Silent Alarm, writing songs like Positive Tension, um, like Eating Glass, like some of these references that were kind of being mentioned. And of course, the stuff I did never sounded remotely like any any of these things really, but it was always like a good starting point. It was something to um, just trigger inspiration.
Yeah, because I was watching a video of Kelly talking about Banquet, saying, I don't know if you realise after the fact that it sounded a lot like a Pixies song in terms of some of the melody. But yeah,
Well,
yeah.
there were times where he was quite explicit about songs that he wanted to reference. Um, I'm not going to mention some of the songs. I mean, some people have already spotted, like on Banquet, kind of the chorus owes to another song.
Well,
But
he said a member of the band said it was too much like Blair, Girls and Boys.
oh, really?
Yeah.
I mean, that I don't think that was me, but I was a one for shooting things down constantly. I'd forever go, oh, we've got a song in this key, or we've already got something at this tempo. I was forever like, throwing spanners in the works. I don't remember saying it sounded like Girls and Boys. It could have been me, to be fair. We were always, yeah, always kind of tough taskmasters. But between ourselves and also like personally, we're like we can do better.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, there were a lot of references, and sometimes they were what we ended up doing were quite close to the reference. But in the context of the music, that's fine because it's always going to become something else, even if you're throwing in a little melody from somewhere else.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's easy to put yourself off with. I mean, I was only in a very small band, but we did that all the time. We'd be like, "Oh no, it sounds too much like that." When I imagine a lot of like Kelly talking about Banquet, it's like a lot of songs are going to be similar to others, but you just got to make it your own type thing.
Yeah, I think I don't know how early on we had our own personality as a band. I mean, I think that's something that is fair to say came through eventually. Um, but I think by virtue of Russell's playing, there was always like a melodic sensibility at work. And as I say, when Matt came in rhythmically, things changed quite dramatically, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And then just interested in terms of the branding because you mentioned like graphic designing.
Mm.
Am I right in thinking you had a big say in the name as well as all the branding type of thing?
Yeah, I mean, we used to just write down stuff. I would love to say, I had this great vision, but it was just one of the things that I'd written down. Um, we'd been called a few different things. We'd been called the Angel Range, I think, and then we were called Union. And for various reasons, we were like, no, let's get a better name. And I mean, I also with Bloc Party, it was that kind of that sort of ambiguity that I liked about it because it was Bloc Party with a K, that would mean something else. Take the K away, it's got this kind of Eastern European sort of gravitas to it. And, I loved bands that had those kind of like ambiguous names. So, and I think it just looked good written down. And yeah, I mean, as I say, I was doing graphic design at that time. So I would always just like do flyers, and eventually I did like a little website in Microsoft front page, which I'm guessing now probably looked really bad in most browsers, but it never occurred to me to look at it in any other browser than the one I had. Um, but it was all built of like frames. So I'm sure on some browsers, like you couldn't even see the content. It was just like blown into a different corner. But yeah, I mean, this was at that time, this was just kind of before MySpace, but when bands were having a presence online, I figured it was something we should be doing. And yeah, so we bought the domain and all this kind of stuff. And I remember thinking like the name has to work on a domain, like it needs to be a domain that we can get. Like that's even in like 2003 or whenever that was. We, that was a factor at that point.
Right. Okay. Did you get blockparty.com?
Yeah, we must have done. Yeah, we must have done.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes. Yeah. And then in terms of feeling part of a scene or anything, did you feel like a kinship with any of the bands early on type thing?
Not really. I mean, there wasn't a scene until later, in any kind of sense that you'd sort of understand a scene. When we started, we were playing at the Dublin Castle, and there was this club at the Bull and Gate, and basically around in and around Camden, and you'd just be playing on those kind of like 4 nights, 5 nights a week bills with four bands that don't sound anything like each other, and they're just stacking up with whoever's looking for gigs at that time. I mean, later on, like 2003, 2004, and the gigs were starting to pop up in Shoreditch. Yeah, I mean, definitely would see those people. And like, for instance, I only ever met Pete Doherty, for instance, like once on, we were playing this gig. There's this band called the Cazals,
Oh
and
yeah, they've got on here. Yeah.
right, so they did this, they'd had their gear nicked or something. And I think our manager at this point, we had a manager, and he must have known someone who was in the band or whatever. And they were like looking for bands to play like a benefit, and we did. Um,
What a
but this
benefit? A
was,
benefit for their gear.
yeah, because their gear had
All
been
right.
nicked. Um, I think that was like probably one of the few times we did anything like approaching a guerrilla gig because it was in somebody's loft,
Right.
and you like there was a bar, but it was like you had to use raffle tickets to. And Pete Doherty was there, and he like when we finished our set, he came up to me. He was like, "Do you want to jam?" And I was like, "No, not really." I mean, we weren't the kind of band that jam, in that Libertines way, like get your friends up and just play through the classics or whatever. That was literally the opposite of our kind of vibe, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, what did it mean? What, the whole band or just you type thing? Don't know.
No, well, he just said it to me. We were packing down. I think this is just Pete Doherty being Pete Doherty. He was probably
Right,
just
okay.
like,
Just wanted a bit of a knees
has
up.
anyone got an acoustic and we can do this song in like B and it'll be great. And we just weren't those kind of musicians. We played our songs and that was it.
No, yeah, fair play. But did it feel like you were making constant progress at that point, type thing?
Yeah, I mean, again, the the early years were kind of years of obscurity, and we played with lots of different drummers before that. I think it got up to like 7 or 8 different people that played drums for us.
What
And we
happened with
didn't,
that? Was it just different reasons why it didn't work out type thing?
well, Grant, who ended up in the Rifles, he was friends with Russell and he drummed with us for a bit, but he was like, it's not totally my thing. I'm gonna wait. Ironically, I think he also was, well, I remember him being a big McCluskey fan and he was like, I want to do something that sounds like McCluskey. And obviously the Rifles weren't that. But so he was just like, we did a demo with Grant. Um, I think with every one we did, either it was like someone who just didn't quite fit, like personality wise, or didn't quite get the references, or it just didn't feel right in terms of the playing. And none of us could really put our finger on it. We just knew it's not quite there. And really, when Matt came along, that was the moment where we all understood, oh, this is exactly what we've been looking for, basically. Like a drummer who can really hit hard, but who's got sort of rhythm and musicality. And it utterly changed the band. And it was finally like, this is what we're about. And, you know, stuff like She's Hearing Voices really came out of that early period where Matt was in the band. I had someone I could play off, and it, I can't understate it really. I can't overstate it. I could understate it. But yeah, playing with Matt was like, it made the band make sense to me more than it ever had. I was like, yes. And um, also, I think it meant that Kelly and Russell could actually play less. They could stand off a bit. So if you go to like She's Singing Voices, like it's just kind of like a little bit of rhythm guitar, and then the solo comes at the end. But a lot of it's just like the bass and the drums sort of driving things. And I think, it was that kind of unlocked the band.
Yeah, yeah. And did you know him personally before that? Because he said, I remember him saying he was quite reluctant to join the band for a while. I think he just did he work with Kelly or something?
Well, Matt was really good friends with Babak Ganjai, and Babak and Kelly both worked at the Curzon together.
Right, that's it. Yeah.
Babak had been saying to Matt for ages, my friend Kelly's looking for a drummer and you'd probably be good for it. And I think Matt was, firstly, I'm not sure he really wanted to be a drummer. Like, I think he wanted to be in a band and maybe like play guitar. And secondly, I think he got the sense that if he got to a point where he was trying out for Bloc Party or wherever we were called at that point, um, that it would it would be like a commitment. Like it wasn't, he couldn't do it part time. It's just gonna be, you're in the band and now we go. Because I think he'd already heard from Babak how sort of driven Kelly was, because it was all Kelly was in. It was round the clock. He was writing songs or thinking about the next gig or working out who to send a demo to. He was just kind of like um, obsessed. And I think Matt got the sense that if he tried out for the band, then he was going to be in the band. So he was just like holding off for a bit.
Yeah, yeah. And there's that thing about, bassists and drummers being on a level type thing. Did he find himself quite close with Matt early on type thing?
Yeah, I think, as I say, it sort of opened up the band completely for me. Um, and Matt was also a little bit closer to my age because the thing with me, and I'm probably like in the older generation of people who've probably done this podcast. I was like 24 in when I joined the band. I was probably a bit older, and by the time we were breaking through, that's 2 or 3 years later. And Kelly and Russell were both like 19, I think, when I met them, really young. But Matt's sort of in between in the age, in terms of the age. So, things that our tastes were quite similar. We were both into things like Sonic Youth, kind of noisy stuff. And yeah, he was just a good bridge between all of us. Like it just kind of cemented the band together. And yeah, Matt had this little Nissan Bluebird, and he lived in Hanwell. By this point, we were rehearsing in East Acton. It was kind of handy because I'd moved to Oxford later on, but I was still catching the train into Paddington. Um, but when Matt joined, he used to pick me up from Ealing Broadway and drive to the rehearsal space. So we used to chat a lot in the car, and um, yeah, I always felt a kinship with Matt, and I still do. You know, we're still close. In fact, we're kind of working on some music even now. So yeah, there's a connection that kind of uh, continues.
Yeah, I might chase you up on that because someone was asking about that on Reddit. So,
Right. Yeah.
but yeah, it's interesting that you're a bit older than. Were you like how interested were you in the bands that were getting pushed by NME at that time, like the Strokes and the Libertines, stuff like that?
I liked the Strokes. Yeah, I liked the Strokes. I mean, I suppose because I was traveling in from outside of London, I wasn't there in the same way to like go to the gigs. But yeah, the Strokes I liked. The Libertines never landed for me. That was not my kind of bag really. Um, I think yeah, I mean I had a little bit of experience. It was useful, kind of life experience, I suppose. It was useful for the band because these guys were, in Matt's case, pretty much straight out of college. Kelly and Russell, I think both started college but didn't finish. Um, I'd had a job. I was just kind of like I've been around the block a bit, and in terms of the music, yeah, I was cynical enough having seen Britpop, but I think we all, you know, we I liked Blur, um, but we also all of us were quite wary of how Britpop had kind of been sold as this sort of homegrown scene. And I always said later, especially when we were touring in America and actually, you know, we had success in America that I think a lot of bands of our time didn't have, you know. And I always said we listened to American bands, you know, I was like Sonic Youth were, you know, really important. When bands like the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and the Rapture, when we started coming across those bands, I think we felt more of a kinship with that than we had in London with this kind of slightly you know, that sort of enemy scene around the Libertines. I think we understood ourselves more kind of a little bit more um it, kind of influenced by American stuff basically. So um yeah, I wasn't totally buying that to be honest.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
I think Russell said you almost recorded with Gordon Raphael at one point. You were scheduled to, and then
Yes.
someone
Yes.
locked you out of the studio or something.
Um it's a funny one. I can't remember if I ever met Gordon Raphael. He used to do this night at the Buffalo Bar, and I think we played it. And so he must have seen us or heard a demo or talked to Kelly, and he was like, "Yes, we were just about to do like another demo or something. We had a few songs that we wanted to work on, and around at that time, and Gordon Raphael, they'd had some conversation, and Kelly had mentioned that we were recording. It's like, I want to be there. I'll turn up and just oversee it. And we were like, wow, that's quite cool. Um, and somebody was ill. I think it was either the guy who owned the studio space was ill that day, or Gordon Raphael was ill that day, and he couldn't make it. But more likely the former, that actually the guy was too ill to open the studio, and we just had to cancel the whole session. And I don't know what any conversations that were had with Gordon Raphael after that, whatever happened. But I guess it didn't kind of slow us down in that sense. I mean, it was. I remember it being quite devastating that day, and funnily enough, like that's just up the road from where I live. It was in Clapton, this studio that was a guy had built in like a little industrial space that he was sort of living in. And yeah, I do remember that day was like a real blow because we were like, oh, now what do we do? But obviously, I mean, around that time things were happening because the first bit of press we ever did was in the Face, and there's a picture of us all crammed together in this tiny little studio, and I've got my head down and I'm wearing a Mogwai t-shirt, and it was like all staged for this Face photo shoot, but we did that in that studio in Clapton. So it was around that time that we were starting to get like a name. People were writing about us, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Yes. All right, well, gonna go a bit off script here because I've got so many questions that I want to try and get them all in.
Yeah, of course.
So it might be a bit all over the shop in terms of
Sure.
the timeline, but got Cherry, Blooder, and Gold Bricked on Reddit saying, "Would be fascinated to know Gordon's retrospective take on some of those tracks on the second album, whether he would replace anything on A Weekend in the City with a B-side."
Um, okay. I was actually listening to some of those B-sides the other day because they're on Spotify now, like finally, aren't they? Um, I think the song that ended up being called We Were Lovers, it went through a few different name changes. I think that probably should have been on the record. Um, that was sort of like a, yeah, that one should have made the cut. I don't know. I mean, a lot of those songs were actually written after that record was finished, and we just had a few extra ideas, and we needed all these B-sides, so we went in and just kind of knocked a bunch out. I mean, I think even Jack Knife Lee would say the issue that we were having with that record was that Kelly was still writing the lyrics kind of quite late in the day. We were already in the studio, and we had like the backing tracks sort of done, but the lyrics weren't totally finished. So we'd find ourselves like, we went and did it at a residential studio, Grouse Lodge in Ireland. We were there. We had nothing else to do. We were just like there to make a record, and we'll be like, "What should we do today?" Well, I've got some ideas for this track, and what if we like, I remember one of the things was like, let's do a prepared piano for 718, like hanging paper clips off the piano strings kind of thing and playing the part. And we were just like dossing around doing loads of stuff like that we didn't really need. So it ended up with all these like too many tracks really, and then trying to mix them down was a bit, you end up kind of following these ideas and getting bogged down. So I think it probably should have just been a bit more streamlined. In terms of like those other B-sides, I mean, there's some good songs in there, but a lot of them were sort of afterthoughts. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, one song I would say, England, was it I don't know if the demo of that is like out there. I mean, it will probably surface eventually, but the demo for that song was quite different. It was sort of more rhythmic, and that was a song where I felt like the production kind of it took it in a slightly kind of flat direction. So yeah, England and We Were Lovers probably should have been on the record. Of what you drop, I wouldn't say.
Yeah, fair play. I'm right in thinking you ended up playing different instruments on that one as well, that album.
Well, yeah, that was when we started again, sort of dicking around doing different stuff. I mean, the Glockenspiel was out at that point, and I was playing that on 718. I don't know how we ended up doing Sunday as this big jam with two drum kits. Which again, I think, I love playing the drums. I'm not the best drummer in the world, but it's one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, can I play drums on this one? Whereas I think actually, I don't know if it really helped, especially on the record, if to listen to that and go, oh, it's got two drum kits on it, sounds great. No, it was just an idea that we decided to follow through instead of just going, okay, well, it's got a vibe, but let's just make sure the song's as good as it can be, as opposed to like having all these other sort of instruments played, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And what about in terms of co-writing lyrics? I'm right in thinking you've got like co-writing credits on certain songs.
Well, really, those songs are really just really early songs. So, and you basically, if I'm singing and it's not just like la la or something very basic, then it's probably something I wrote. So I'm basically thinking staying fat, the Marshalls are dead. Um, yeah, Kelly would just go, I want another vocal here. And early on, he was just like, whatever you want to do here, you can just do. I think it was one of those things where as time went by, he was less into sort of collaborating in that way. He had much more fixed idea as each kind of record went down. You know, I mean, like for instance, Luno, I'd just sing that line. I can't even remember the line in that song, but it's something about, oh, and your nose is bleeding. Kelly sings, and your nose is bleeding, and I'll go, you deserve it. I would have written that, but I mean, it's not. That's just a tiny little kind of flourish. Yeah, it just the space for that kind of just stopped being as available, I suppose. Yeah, as time went by.
Ah, okay. Did you find that frustrating at all? Or did you just realize that was what was working for the band?
Um, I mean, huh, you know, there's I don't know. I mean, yeah, quite often it's whatever the song wants, whatever it requires. You follow that. In terms of like the bigger picture, like how the scope we had kind of individually, you know, that did change over time. I think, yeah, I mean, there's lots of reasons why that happened. I think I definitely got a sense, even from as early as the second record, that it was harder to kind of suggest things and get things through and you know, have like a counterpoint, I suppose, and go, what about if it's like this? You know, those kind of suggestions were kind of less taken on board or more kind of like, yeah, I think it should be like this. And I just learned to just sort of roll with that really because, you know, when you have a certain degree of success, there are a lot of expectations that go with that. And I find like, and I think anyone in a band who's maybe gone through that will just say it becomes less about you personally. Like, even as a band, you feel like there are things happening to this band and about this band that are actually sort of not anything to do with the four of us. They're like forces outside of the band, whether that's management or label or how the press wants to depict you, or even just like what your fans think of what you're doing, that you find yourself kind of just letting go of. Like there's this Manic song that talks about it quite well. I think it's called Close My Eyes, and he sings, it's not about us, it's not about us anymore. And I think that's true for any band, even when you're like quite protective of like the vision for the band and like your own sort of control of it, you find yourself like almost kind of sleepwalking a bit and going, am I am I actually like driving this? Who's in charge? You know, it feels like those forces are kind of outside of the band, pushing it as much as anything inside the band, you know.
Yeah, yeah. No, I can imagine, to be fair. And then Weekend Just Gone, um,
Mm.
people were celebrating 20 years of Silent Alarm. I don't know if did you have a different date for that in your email?
Well, Matt tells me that it came out here on the 21st, and that's even Wikipedia's wrong about that.
Ah, okay.
But Wikipedia says that I think yesterday it was released in Japan first, which is
Right.
quite possible because they did used to stagger like release dates back then. So it's quite plausible that it came out in Japan 20 years yesterday. I don't know for sure. And if Wikipedia is off for the date and that's what Matt says, then, you know, God help us.
But what kind of emotions does that stir up when you hear like 20 years since that album type thing?
Well, I kind of thought it was if it's the 14th, and the latest release that I've got coming out with the Nun is coming out on the 14th. So I thought it'd be a nice way of, bookending like these two periods really is um there's a 20-year anniversary and I'm putting something new out, but I don't know if it actually is the right day or not. I mean, I think in terms of that record, obviously I left the band quite a long time ago, and there was a time around when I left the band and in the years afterwards where I probably did like went out of my way to sort of avoid thinking about it or listening to those records or kind of having a drawing any conclusions about it. It was just like a thing I did. But I think now, yeah, I mean, time sort of, I think has been quite kind to that record. Like it still sounds pretty good, right? And
Definitely.
and so yeah, you know, I'm happy to have had a role in that, like some ownership of it, because again, I haven't been in the band for a long time. I don't really know much about the band at the moment, but I know what we were at that point, and I know that that was like a special time that created a special record, and I'm proud of that.
Yeah, yeah. And we've got a question on Instagram from Booper1219 who says, what was his favourite moment in the studio with Paul and Garrett? I assume that's in reference to Silent Alarm. But
Yeah, well, Garrett did the second record, and then that both of them sort of did a tag team on the third record where we used both of them on different tracks.
okay.
Um, favorite moment. I I don't know if I have a favorite moment, but I have a quite a strong memory of the first time we went into the studio with Paul. We did Banquet, um, but we also did Tulips and Compliments, and there may have been something else. So the version of Compliments that's on the record we actually did in our first sort of session with Paul. And there was a bit where Russell's laying down this kind of twinkly guitar part on the I guess it's the middle eight, it's sort of the build up into the big section at the end. And it was really pretty. And I was there. Paul was kind of like, I think he was sort of bent over the pedal board, like maybe fiddling with something or making notes. And Russell did sort of immaculate take that just sounded perfect. And Paul lifted his head and he had like a tear in his eye. Quite, it's quite a sentimental story. But it was like, I think we had this moment where we're like, well, we're doing something quite special here. Like it really does feel like that in the moment. So that, yeah, that's a memory I have.
Yeah. Could you tell he was going to be, or that he was a special producer at that point type thing?
Well, we kind of, I think he was driven and I really responded to his energy, but we actually clashed with him quite a lot in the beginning, especially, I mean, in retrospect, I think like he's doing what a producer should do, which is kind of suggest offbeat things or things you haven't thought of or like reframe it for you. I remember like this is bit on Banquet, which is like it's like a little Casio keyboard or something. And Paul's going, and it was lifted out of Russell's guitar part. There's just a sort of twinkly bit. And Paul was like, you should double that on a little Casio. And Russell's like, why? I don't. I don't understand why. Like I've written the part, like it sounds fine. Like why would I do do that? So we kind of, I think we were quite set in our ways and figured the songs were just the songs, and we didn't really understand that a producer's going to draw little nuances out, and sometimes those things are the kind of like the gold dust that makes this songs kind of pop or whatever.
Yeah, yeah. And do you produce a lot of your own stuff now, or how does it work in terms of new music?
Well, I mean, for me, it sort of depends on the project. Like with the band I'm in currently, it's very much like live takes, and I actually appreciate that because I've always wanted to be in a band where it's just like rolling live take done, and quite often I don't know whether I was never in a band that was like tight enough, or the pressure is on when you're playing and somebody does a little mistake, you're like, oh, can I do this again? This band, The Nun, is like it's a lot more impromptu and it's supposed to be kind of noisy and like vibey, and this mistakes stay in and they're fine. I, I mean, I'll record however whatever works. I mean, like I've done a few bits on my own at home, and I've recorded just like it's all very like logic based and tracking and like and the other extreme is just like just going in a room and just crashing out. I'm open to lots of different ways.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of Silent Alarm and the B-sides, people were quite interested in what type of sign-off you get for like the re-releases type thing. If do you get consulted about what's going on?
Oh, me. Well, yeah, I mean, I know that there is like how do I put this? There's, there is like a kind of version of the album sort of being discussed and worked on, sort of more deluxe pack package kind of thing that think is kind of likely to appear sooner or later. Yeah, I mean they've they keep me and Matt in the loop. We're still like players on that record, so um in fact I did find a few photos. Anyone who's familiar with the sleeve, the CD booklet and the record or whatever, there's some pictures in there, and I did find most of them are taken by Paul Wetworth. I did find a folder the other day that's like all the ones he sent me. Because actually, yeah, I was doing like the graphic design even for Silent Alarm, so I mocked that up effectively. Um, so Paul had sent me some photos, and I stuck them in the booklet. But there's like a two or three ones that didn't get used, so they might get an airing perhaps with a upcoming release.
And were you behind the front cover for that album as well?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly because quite often Kelly had an idea, or I would just sort of mock some things up, some suggestions. I don't know if he said I can. I imagine something quite plain and white. I don't know whose idea like a snowscape was, but I do remember sitting in this internet cafe in somewhere near the Barfly, because again, this is before smartphones, and um, at that time, like if you were out and about and you wanted to like check your email or do anything like that, you'd have to find an internet cafe. And for whatever reason, probably we had like a gig at the Barfly and an afternoon. And I was like, I want to go and just check my email and do some bits of like maybe some graphic work. And I remember Googling like snow snow scenes and finding that picture, which is by a photographer called Ness Sherry. Um, I just it sort of came up at random, and I was like, this might work, and I suggested it, and yeah, people were into it.
Yeah, yeah. There's quite cool on Instagram, like a moving one that you can use as a
Oh,
background.
really?
I don't know who designed it, but it's pretty cool.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, there's a weird like hole in the snow at the front of it. Probably nowadays I would have like airbrushed that out or something, but for whatever reason I was like, I don't know, I liked the photo as it was, and whenever I see it, I was like, what is that hole? I don't kind of get it. Why is that there?
Did you have a big input in the other album covers then as well?
Well, you know, this also sort of maps onto, how our roles changed in a way over time. Like, yeah, flyers and singles I was very heavily involved with in the beginning, and then Silent Alarm I was like helping mock up the sleeve, and then it came to Weekend in the City, and Kelly had already like found this photographer, um, and all the singles are different photos from that same photographer. I mean, I was into those photos, but I didn't really have much work to do. I mean, I probably did do some like proofs for the booklet, but you know, then like intimacy, that image was just sort of picked on. I didn't really have anything to do with that. I think like four was where it became a little bit more collaborative in a lot of ways, and I did design those rings for four. But it's just one of those things where like sometimes I could have some input, and my opinion was sort of considered, and sometimes it was like, yeah, I've already worked it out.
Yeah. Did any other bands or artists come to you for help with their artwork or anything?
I mean, nobody particularly well known. I, I did a sleeve for my brother-in-law was in this band in Texas called J versus K, and I did a sleeve for them. I did do a sleeve for this. There was this, you know, I forget what it was in benefit for, but there was like a celebrity kind of they did a cover of Ever Fallen in Love by the Buzzcocks. It had various musicians on it. I know Peter Hook was on it. And I was asked to kind of do something for that. Um like visually for the sleeve. But yeah, I didn't do a lot of stuff really. But I was throughout, and some of this stuff will surface at some point, but I was designing like laminates for the tour, and sticky passes and t-shirts. I did a few t-shirts. Um, there was always something that needed designing. Like that's true even now in a band. Like somebody's got to put the website up, do some visuals for the sleeves or flyers or Instagram posts. Yeah, there's always something that needs doing.
No, it's interesting because I was talking to Steve Bays from Hot Hate recently, and he was saying like how important now that merch is for bands, or it can be. It could be like one of the biggest incomes. I suppose it always has been, but I guess maybe if you can like crack some kind of intriguing merch that people are going to latch onto, then it's a big thing.
Absolutely. It's much more like a cornerstone of how you earn as a touring band. Um, I mean, I just played a show with Mets, and their drummer does all their graphic stuff, and they must have had like 8 to 10 different like t-shirts on sale. And I think Mets are like their fans are like will buy stuff, so they know that they can do it. But it's all really solid. There's always like a cohesiveness to the look, to the branding, which you probably wouldn't say about the Bloc Party t-shirts that came in later. But um yeah, I'm into that. I mean that's the thing, because like that's something I've done in my life, is like design. Like it makes all the difference if you've got like a cohesion to like the visuals. Yeah, that was always important to me.
Yeah, yeah. And then I don't know how to word this, but people are asking in terms of like the Block Party legacy.
Mm.
Someone's put um, Are you happy with the way that they seem to be? This is their words, not mine. Rinsing silent alarm. And someone's followed up saying that the answer is yes. He's very willing to talk about this if you ask him. I don't know where they're getting that information from, but
Oh, right. Um, I mean, look, I think, the positive for me is that I still earn off the songwriting for that record. So, like, if the band are playing that record and people are listening to it and buying it or streaming it, then that's good for me. Um, in terms of whether they're doing it justice, I couldn't say. I
fair
couldn't say.
enough, mate. Let's have a look at some more questions then. Might be interesting to know his perspective about what happened at Latitude 2013.
Oh, wow. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That was my last show. I mean, we could probably do a podcast on like that whole summer um, because Matt, um, he quit kind of, I want to say about 20 shows from the end of that tour. Like they were all festivals. And, and I was very sympathetic to Matt's position on that. I did say you should finish the summer. And I think he says now he probably should have. But he was at the time he was just I have to leave. I can't do this anymore. Um, and when Matt left, I more or less knew that that was me done because I didn't think the band was. I thought Matt was kind of like the heartbeat of the band, effectively, and yeah, I didn't feel like there was a version of the band without Matt that I could probably do. So, but I wanted to do those 20 shows because, they were booked and there was a payday in in it. And but it wasn't very fun that summer, um, for lots of reasons. But the main one is that Matt wasn't there for me, and when I say Matt wasn't there for me, what I mean is Matt wasn't there, and for me, I felt it was so critical to me, the experience of being in the band, to play off Matt, to look over and see Matt, to, it was like it was critical to me. And so a little bit of me just kind of like dropped out of out of that band at that moment. I was just like, just get through this, do these shows, and then I'm sort of done. And so as a result, yeah, I was probably taking a bit more alcohol on stage than I might normally have. And of course, the last show being the last show, it's like, right, I'm pretty sure I had just like a row of shots set up on the drum riser and I was just working my way through them. So yeah, I was probably a bit sloppy, but it was, I was kind of like the door was open. I was ready to walk through it. So I wasn't really thinking about playing. And by the way, you know, um, there was there was plenty of sloppy playing on all corners of the stage at various times. I wouldn't say that like I was any sloppier than anyone else had been in the band at one time or another.
Yeah, yeah, fair play. And then, was it like a known thing that that was gonna be a last gig type thing to everyone?
Well, ha, well, no, not I don't know to be honest, because I very much sort of retreated into a kind of survival mode where I wasn't really talking to anyone, and it was all just we need to get through this. I mean, my position on that whole last year is that we played too many shows anyway, because there was a sense even before we did that last, well, the fourth record, there was a sense that, because we'd taken time off after the third record, there's this idea that will the band actually come back after the fourth record? And so our management are booking agents, and we had an agent over here, we had a different agent in the States, and we had a third agent in Canada. So we were playing like separate Canadian tours. There were like there's lots of authors, and the general consensus was let's do everything. And I felt like it was too much, really. I feel like actually, if we'd done only, let's say, like 80% of the shows we did on that run, we might have got through it to the end. But we'd done too many shows. We were together much more than was healthy for that band at that moment. So um, it was bound to, these things were bound to come to a head. They ended up coming to a head in a way that they probably wouldn't have if we'd just taken a bit more time off on that year. And yeah, so I think by the time we got into that last run, none of us were really talking to each other at all. We were just like laser focus on getting through to the end of that run, and then let's have a discussion in a few months. But as far as I was concerned, yeah, I was done, certainly for the time being. But I think pretty much at that time I was like, I'm not going to want to do this after this tour. I'm sort of done, really.
Yeah, yeah. And then, I mean, just going back to Matt leaving, could you understand why he left at that
Oh
point?
yeah, absolutely, yeah. And if yeah, I don't know how things would have been different. I still think even if Matt hadn't quit on that run and we just got to the end and just gone our separate ways, I'm not convinced that Matt would have come back. And as I say, I I wasn't interested in doing it without Matt. So, it's kind of like, yeah, it happened quite suddenly, but it was not unexpected at all. No.
And there's this thing around, I think Kelly said something about, there's this vague anecdote he said about people taking drugs or something,
Yeah.
that Matt felt he got caught up in.
Well, I
Um,
think Matt corrected what that was, right?
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the thing is that I got asked to give a quote when I left the band, and I just declined. I didn't have anything to say at that point. I was just like, I'm leaving. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, that whatever Kelly said and however that was reported, I thought was really clumsy, and I didn't appreciate it because it's didn't ref because it implied something that was not true at all. Um, especially anyone who like actually knows me, like I'm not really interested in that kind of stuff, to be honest. So, yeah, us all to be kind of tarred, those of us who left the band to be tarred with this vague idea that someone had a drug problem, I didn't take kindly to at all. But I, as I said, I more or less kind of like shut the door on that. I was like, I'm not going to be drawn on anything at that time, and I really haven't said much ever since, really. But yeah, it was a misleading thing I didn't really appreciate, and it wasn't true. But I think, over time, like as I say, like Matt's cleared it up, I think, that one.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's, yeah, definitely cleared that up. And a
Mm.
video that's gone pretty viral on YouTube. I think it ended
Oh,
up being an NME
good,
article of its own,
good
of
for
its own
you.
doing.
Yeah, I don't know if I can give you anything as viral as that, but the door's open now, so maybe like there'll be more questions and more kind of like more candor.
Yeah, well, if these Reddit questions are anything to go by, then
Okay, bring it on, bring it on.
yeah, I did want to mention the band Young Legionnaire because you
Mm,
had that, you started that a few years before you left type thing. Was it in
yeah,
one of these hiatuses that you had in Bloc Party?
right. Yeah, I mean, again, in 2009, we're after Intimacy. I think, in a way, like without going into it in great detail, like Intimacy, the experience of making Intimacy and the sort of end result for me was like the least satisfying thing we ever did, really. Like I uh, there's a few songs on that record that I didn't even play on, like Signs. There's a couple of other ones where I just, well, I wasn't even asked in that day, you know. It was like, oh, me and Russell are working on stuff. Fine, whatever, you know. I mean, I appreciate like a change in direction, but it just felt very disjointed, and certainly it was like wasn't that cohesion, which we got back a bit in four, you know, and I think that was the point of four, was to like make it about the four of us, you know. But at the time, I think, you know, when we finished that run, Kelly was already talking about doing a solo record, and we were going to take a year off. And lots of people were saying that's a bad idea, by the way. You know, the momentum will the lack of momentum will kill you. But
Who's
no,
saying that out of interest?
well, I think the management understood that we needed time off from each other. There were people maybe in our crew who were like, "Are you sure?" But I mean, obviously, you know, that's a job for them that they've got to go and find other gigs in that year, and they don't know if they're going to be able to come back and stuff. So I can understand why people were like, "Are you sure you want to take this time off now?" I mean, I think it was a good thing for the band because of what happened later. Like we needed to go and do other stuff, and um, I thought it would be healthy, and I think it was, for us to have other projects that we could channel things into. And yeah, I had a lot of fun in Young Legionnaire. I mean, it's something that's not so easy for me to do because Paul Mullen is um he's based in the States now, and he's quite busy. Like he's like a stage manager for various bands, so he's quite busy touring. So I haven't had much opportunity to like hook up with him and work on stuff. Um, but yeah, I mean, I had a lot of fun doing that band, and have had a lot of fun in that band. It's very instinctive playing, really, because especially like in that experience of intimacy, and even four in what way, like could be quite agonizing, like writing in Bloc Party, the kind of, you know, debating over bits and pieces, and like second guessing like whether you're doing like the part that feels instinctive or whatever. In Young Legionnaire, we just have a riff, we just play. That's the riff. And there were bits of dynamics and things that came in and out of it, but like it just very easy. It just felt kind of natural, and that was a good thing for me at that point.
Yeah, I mean, someone was asking, that band and your current band
Mm,
are obviously heavier,
mm.
you'd say, than Block Party. Was that always something you wanted to do? Was that more your style type thing?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I didn't know necessarily that I'd end up where I am. Um, because I'm in lots of ways I'm kind of doing like the nastiest thing like now. But that really just appeals to me. I think, yeah, I have a broad range of interests and musically, and a lot of the things that Kelly was into, yeah, even pop music and things like DJ Shadow and Björk were things that we were listening to like before Silent Alarm. Like I was, yeah, really interested in exploring like sort of melodically and quiet and different little sort of dynamic ideas. Yeah, I think my instinct is just like make it ugly, and I'm certainly getting the chance to do that now. Yeah. But also the other thing is like when you get older, and this is I'm sure plenty of musicians sort of get this, is you just want to do what feels natural. You just like we spent so much time in Block Party kind of just second guessing like what should this song sound like? You know, should it be more like this? Is it, can we get more of a particular sort of influence into it? There was a lot of discussion and like being slightly at odds kind of constantly about everything. And when you get older, you just want to like turn up and just plug in and just kind of do what feels right. And so yeah, that's sort of why I'm kind of making noisier music now. It just appeals to me. It's more fun.
Yeah, yeah. All right, well, back to the questions. Jagged Baptist Club on Instagram says, how would you rank the Bloc Party albums that you're involved in from like, I don't know really, in terms of fondness?
Right. Yeah, I mean, Sight Alarm probably, yeah, that's everyone's kind of favorite. Um, it was just we didn't know any better and we just sort of did the thing that felt right. And so it's the most instinctive one. Um, After that, four was just like a lot easier to make than the others. Um, and we felt like on the same page a lot more at that point. Um, a weekend in the city, and then Intimacy, as I say, was like the most sort of fraught one. And for me, like I'm only ever going to hear like the stress that was going on in the song or in the performance or whatever. That's it's still hard for me to be objective about the songs, but that's my experience.
Yeah, yeah. And then Hamilton Bartholomew on Reddit says, not sure if he's answered this before, but why did he switch from playing with his fingers pre-4 to playing with a pick post-4?
Right. It's a pretty easy answer to that, and it's Young Legionnaire. So because that was a heavier band, I figured I should have like a heavier rock sound. And I'd kind of always wanted to play with a pick, but for whatever reason, I hadn't got the knack earlier. I mean, I was kind of self-taught, so however I played was just what felt right. But at that point, I was like, I should probably. I'd got a grabber bass by then. It was like it's like a heavier tone. I was like, I should probably learn to play with a pick. And then it was just hard to go back because by that point, I was just like, I was used to that attack coming off the pick. And I was missing that when I went back to the fingers. I mean, it's weird because a lot of those early songs, they're hard to play with a pick. Like something like Pioneers is really difficult because I'm playing like the E string and the G string like at once with fingers. But so I would sort of go in between. But I think something like So Here We Are, which is like an arpeggio, which I played with my thumb, I had to then kind of shift to playing with a pick, and it's just like a slightly different tone. But yeah, I mean, I could play with my fingers if I need to. I do sometimes.
Yeah, and sticking to the bass, someone was asking, French Exit on Reddit said, I would love to know how the OG light blue P bass was destroyed and if he used an E burr in Selfish Sun.
I no, an ebo was used in Selfish Sun, and that's Russell doing that. It's not on the bass. I think it's just like a low tune guitar. Um, well, I mean, there's a thing on my Instagram where I tell the story about that bass, but um, it's downstairs, but it's so beaten up that bass because I really did just chuck it around. Like I don't know if people remember this about me or about Block Party, but like it was quite chaotic. It was quite physical, and I used to throw my bass around like nobody's business. Like throw it into the drums, just skid it across the stage. I'd chuck it. I'd just throw it. I just, you know, rock and roll, I suppose. Um, and on that again was on that last run, and I think I was throwing it with even more abandon. And I threw it in Switzerland. I threw it behind me on stage, and the neck got caught in a lighting truss, and it just snapped. So that was that was the end of that neck. But it has a different neck on it now, so it's still kind of half that guitar is still sort of operational.
Ah, okay. Then Bento Box Noir on Reddit. He's got quite a few questions, but ask him about songs he had a big hand in writing. Were there any songs that started with the bass line?
Well, positive tension, I think, I don't know if it started with that bass line, but it definitely like coming up with that part sort of transformed. I think we had like a key for that song. Possibly Kelly had the sort of chorus like open chords, but he was looking for something in the verses. And that definitely that bass line kind of sort of changed the direction. Um, it started on the bass. It's a lot of songs to go through. I mean, on four, well, I had a song called Black that became Black Crown that was actually a B-side, but that was like a riff I wrote. Um, that's a good one. I there were probably more, but off the top of my head, I can't think of like, oh yeah. But I mean, but you know, even think if you think of things like price of gas and positive tension, yeah, like if the bass is kind of present in that way, it's probably something that I just came up with, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And same person asked what favorite songs to play live.
Well, it's going back a bit. Uh, um, I've said positive tension about 3 times. I mean that's kind of like the archetypical song from that era. Um, you know, of the later stuff, like Team A was a lot of fun to play that bass line. You know, We're Not Good People was like we didn't play it that much, but it had this crunchy riff that was a lot of fun. Um, Even something like Better Than Heaven on Intimacy, that's got this big payoff at the end, and it's yeah. I mean, I was lucky. There's a lot of fun bass playing in that whole band across the whole period. Like Silent Alarm is full of just fun things to do. Like She's Hearing Voices to play that. It's so simple, but it frees you up to like be present and you know the groove that we had. It's just you can actually experience it, and yeah, it's a lot of fun playing bass on a lot of that stuff. Yeah, absolutely.
And then they say, is there anything you change about intimacy or four?
Uh, I mean, four was more or less what we imagined for that record. I having listened back to it, I played the bass guitar that I played on that was Sid from Les Savy Fav, who was running French Kiss at the time. He lent me that bass because we made that record in New York. He's got this old like 60s P bass. It sounds really good, but it's almost a bit too bright for me. So yeah, I probably should have played like my P bass on that. But apart from that, that's really sort of detail. I think intimacy is just I guess it was important for the band to like do something very different. But yeah, like it's hard for me to like pass judgment on the record. It's just like an odd record. Again, I didn't really play on all the tracks, so I can't really say what I might have played if those songs were recorded differently. But yeah, I don't really have like a strong affinity to that record, really. So I couldn't tell you how it could have been better.
And then got
I dare say it if it had more bass guitar on it, it probably would have been better. But I mean, I'm gonna say that tongue in cheek. You can you can read that how you want.
fair enough, yeah. And then a couple on Patreon. Saul Burney says, were there any particular bassists in that noughties scene that you were fond of? That whole era had some amazing bass tones that were really
Um,
overlooked.
I mean, it depends whether he's talking about like sort of British players. I mean, I mentioned Sid Butler from Les Savy Fav, but obviously they're kind of from a bit earlier. Um, Carlos D was the
Yeah.
guy. I mean, Carsty obviously had this very particular style which nobody else had, or arguably like kind of owes something a little bit to Duran Duran. I'm not sure if you'd appreciate that, but you know, that sort of octave, slightly disco-y stuff. Um, but yeah, just so creative, Carlos. Um, and an interesting guy who also didn't kind of stay the course in the whole kind of indie scene.
Yeah, yeah.
He'd be a good interview, I think, at this point.
No, definitely. Yeah. And then Paul Big Liz on Patreon says, "Do you share the same disdain for Oasis as Kelly and Russell?"
Yeah. Yeah. Again, we could do a whole podcast on that, but um it just wasn't, yeah. I mean, partly from again, I was being a bit older and having sort of lived through Britpop and seeing like the way it was sort of hyped in a way that didn't really speak to me about my experience. But you know, I mean, look, I get it. I get why they had the effect they had at that moment. But you know, it's effectively it's like a pastiche, right? Oasis. It's like it's the Beatles without the experimentalism, right? That's what it kind of that's where it's coming from. That's what I hear anyway. But yeah, we don't have to go into that in any more detail.
Fair play. Anna. Are you quite happy to stick the boot in when they because they split up at that festival that you played at, didn't they?
Yeah, that's one of my great achievements in life is announcing from stage that Oasis had broken up. I shall take that to my grave.
Right, we've got absolutely got one from I say one PV the man on Reddit has asked loads, so I'm going to try and shorten them down a bit. You
Hmm.
mentioned the song "Staying Fat."
Right.
What is the theme of that song? Do you have a vague hint that the early songs were possibly a bit more politically focused?
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, you know, uh, I couldn't tell you exactly what it's about, but I mean, it's kind of like it's you know, just that whole idea of like how at that time culture was sort of you know, it's being kind of sucked into and through the internet. We were much more kind of like aware of everything in a more sort of visceral way. And I think also just being like snotty, young, like kids with an attitude, even though we weren't all like kids exactly at that point. But yeah, just like we were angry and we had, you know, I think the music sort of partly expresses this kind of like energetic, kind of like antsy, um, just again, I've said it so many times, but I mean, the flag waving, the sort of jingoism, even that Britpop sort of um, descended into, like that was anathema to us. You know, it was ultimately it was you know it was very like you know it was very male, straight, like not like a lot of that stuff is just like doesn't have like a groove to it. Like you know, we'd gone to nightclubs club nights, you know, like trash and things, and we were listening to this whole range of music that spoke to us in a different way. And so, you know, I think that energy was something that we were trying to express. Yeah.
Yeah, and then my segue because he says, "Can you ask him about a long song? Can you ask him about a lost song called Kids, played once during the 2005 era?"
Um, I can hear it. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those songs that kind of if you go to like the Weekend in the City B-sides and there's some tracks like what is it? What Kane said to Abel. There's what, a version 2.0. There's a song. It was very much in that mold. It was just kind of like, I think we were still writing these sort of offbeat hi-hat kind of like four to the floor sort of songs, but the appeal had sort of fallen off that sound a bit for us at that point. So it was another one that was a bit like that. It was a bit kind of like a dance floor one, but there was a reason it fell by the wayside. It's just like it didn't make the grade. Didn't cut
Yeah,
it.
yeah. And they also asked about Kane said to her, "Well, I want to know what it was about."
Well, Kane Kane said to Abel, like when we were doing those B-sides, again, we not all the lyrics were totally finished, and we were in and out of the studio at different times. And Kelly had written like the um the verses, and it had this breakdown at the end, and there was nothing on it. And I was just in the studio, and I was like, "Can I just let me sing something on it?" I can't remember what I was singing about there, but it would have been nothing to do with whatever the the rest of the vocal was about. I would have just come up with something like, kind of on the spot.
All right. And they also mention they said there were a bunch of articles that you and Matt wrote back in the day when they were still managing the band's website.
Right.
He said he'd love to show them to you, and I wonder if
Oh,
I'd
he has
love,
them.
well, he said I'd love to show them to him, and I wonder if he would remember the context of those articles and explain what they were about.
Uh, that sounds quite mysterious, doesn't it? I, I'm sure, I've written a lot over the years, and I'm sure at sometimes it was quite pretentious. So I have no idea what that is, but either I would stick by it or it would send a chill. It would send a chill, but
Just
you
blame it
know,
on Matt, I suppose.
yeah, I know that like the letters that have recently resurfaced that I wrote in the NME, which I have not shared, but they may appear at some point. They're pretty on point, so I guess like it's quite possible that whatever I was writing about, I was right, or it made some kind of sense.
And then Marcus the Martian says, I love that with the earlier Bloc Party tracks, Gordon shared lead vocals on some tracks,
Mm.
especially on the self-titled EP. I'm curious to know if the band's original plan was to have two lead singers. His voice contrasted well with Kelly's.
Yeah, I mean, even I remember Epworth saying that it reminded him of the Gang of Four. You know how you had Andy Gill and the singer of the Gang of Four, whose name escapes me, but there was like a different tone to the vocals, and they used that quite nicely. There's that song Anthrax where I think Andy Gill is just like reading this sort of treatise about love just behind the track, and occasionally the words match up. I mean, yeah, I touched on it earlier. I think there was a time where we'd be writing these songs. Kelly would have something, and he'd just say, "Look, I think we should have like a different vocal on this part or on the chorus or whatever, or like Marshals Are Dead. I do like the whole breakdown. The interesting one is Staying Fat because we're both singing at once, but we're singing completely different things, and they don't seem to bear any relation to each other. It was just where we were. I mean, again, once we'd done Silent Alarm, I think my experience was that Kelly felt less comfortable in just like letting us go for whatever we felt was, appropriate. I think he wanted just to control, wanted things in a particular way, and that just kind of got more marked as we went along.
Yeah, yeah. And then Rabbit Clock wants to ask about the music you're working with Matt at the minute type
Mm.
thing.
Um, I mean, it's one of those things where we talked about it for years, and we're both been busy doing various things. I mean, for Matt, Algiers was taking up a lot of his time um, over the last few years. I don't know why I think he's taking a bit of time away from Algiers. I'm not sure if they're going on hiatus or something. So he's got a bit more free time now, and at whatever point we were talking, and he's like, one of the things I want to do is we've always talked about writing together, so let's do something. And I'm like, yeah, absolutely. So we have, I've, we've sent some ideas back and forth, and I have been over to New York to jam some things, just sort of bass and drum ideas, and we've been fleshing them out kind of again separately. I'm going over actually in a few weeks to do a bit more. It's kind of like just something where we're chipping away slowly, and eventually there'll be something to play people. It might not be this year, but it might be next year or something. I don't know. It's like however long it takes, really. And it's just a lot of like I have such a connection with Matt, not just kind of musically, but just, we are the two people in the world that had this experience and left that experience at the same time. So we're sort of tied together really in lots of ways, and um, it's a joy to play with him. It always has been, and it feels the same doing it now. So that's nice to be able to tap into that.
Yeah, yeah. And then in terms of America, like someone was asking about what's the thing you miss most about living in America? Like when did you move over there and why Texas?
My wife's from Texas.
Right.
The main reason we moved there was because I'd quit Bloc Party, and um, you know, we had two kids at the time. They were still like toddlers. Um, and my wife had been doing the lion's share of like raising these kids while I was off touring the world for, those early years when I was still in Bloc Party and the kids were little. And she was like, "Good, you're off tour. I want to be able to like not be bringing up the kids 24/7. I'd like to be able to drop them off at my parents' house, which is, so we moved closer to her parents, and um, and it was good for them to have like a taste of being American. They're half American, so they were able to do that. Um, yeah, I mean, Texas is at this point the politics are completely broken, but it's yeah, some lovely people in Austin, and I have still some great friends there still. We try to get out there like once a year at least. I miss there are a couple of things I miss actually. I miss the bird life in Texas because they have these amazing like blue jays and like red cardinals, and like all our birds are kind of like brown, right, or black. They have amazing sort of bird life there, and I miss there's something quite romantic about the sound of American train, like the train whistle. Like it's if anyone who's ever spent a bit of time like in America, especially if you're outside the cities, like you hear the train whistle every now and again. It's just there's a train going by somewhere. I think that's a very evocative sound. I miss that the sound of the American train whistle.
Yeah, I was saying this one recently, like you don't really associate trains with America for some reason. I don't know why that came up in conversation, but it did.
Well, yeah, I mean it's still like a freight thing. Like it it's not so much like people have an experience of riding trains in America,
Hmm.
but they have these really like incredibly long freight trains. And in Austin, there's various parts of Austin where, the roads get shut down, the barriers come down, and you have to wait for like 10 minutes for this train to trundle through. Like it just seems to go on forever. Yeah, it's still like a really key part of like, I guess, freight infrastructure, the American trains. Yeah.
Yeah, I suppose it's more passenger trains that I can't really picture for some reason, but I don't know why.
Well, I think, I suppose Texas is, I mean, a lot of America's like this, but it doesn't take far, it doesn't take you long to get out of the city of Austin and be right out in the sticks. Like it's a 10-minute drive and you're in the hill country. And in these little towns, they often have a train station, and so you will see these trains coming through. So that yeah, a lot of America is still connected by train. You don't always see it unless you're sort of going to these smaller towns where the trains pull through.
Yeah, yeah. Fair play. Touching all kinds of subjects.
Mm.
Is Austin a bit of a cultural hub type thing? Is it quite a cool place to be?
Well, it used to be.
Yeah.
Um, Unfortunately now it is basically just full of tech folks.
And Joe
And
Rogan, yeah.
yeah, I mean, look, we can see what a certain brand of tech guy is doing to the world right now. Like those people, Austin, eh, it's sad. It's like they don't have the same kind of protections on historical like buildings and sites. And you can go back to, I go back to Austin and they've knocked down a whole city block of old sort of stores that have been there for 50 years and they've just put up like a condominium that looks awful and everyone's driving a Tesla and it's just like you can see the city just getting like there's a word I think I'm trying to remember who came up with this, but like enshittified, this idea about like how the internet and all these platforms have just got worse and worse and harder to use, and that's like exactly what's happened to Austin.
Right, right. Yeah, because Bloc Party Central on Instagram were asking about America. Like, what were your experiences of touring and like your success in America?
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt quite liberated there. Um, it's much less kind of like one tone. You from state to state, audiences change, um, tastes differ, the sights change. For me, it was like a great adventure being out there. And of course, I met my wife there and um, I lived there for so long. So yeah, it's definitely been a key part of my experience. I mean, like one of our first tours with these incredibly long tour drives, I felt like I was in that Black Flag. There's that Black Flag book, Get in the Van, that's just like telling the story of punk rock and how they trailblazed through from all these tiny venues, like just sleeping in the van. And like I saw a bit of that life, and yeah, you can see like the great American road trips, why that's sort of so ingrained in like American kind of law is, yeah, a lot of people you grow up, it's not like being in Milton Keynes, you can drive half an hour and be in Northampton and go and watch gigs. These people might live a 7 hour drive from the nearest place you could go and watch a band. So you spend your life on the road out there, it's in the blood.
Yeah, yeah. And then sticking with Instagram, Jordan King says, "Does Gordon remember the T-shirt he designed for the band that went on sale for charity?"
I mean, I probably would recognize it if somebody pointed it out. I can't remember specifically. Oh, that might be, yeah. It was there was this thing that I did that was like kind of black and it had this yellow kind of swathe across with like butterflies or something, but I don't know if that's what he means. Yeah, I did I designed a lot of t-shirts. I designed a lot of stuff and I was going through some of this stuff the other day. I was like, I there were like four things that got rejected for every one that got approved. So like there was a lot a lot of stuff. I forget now like what all the different things were.
Do you still have any kind of royalties with the merch since it's like using stuff you
The
designed?
merch, no. There was
Okay.
never no, I mean, it's more or less you're designing for the band, but you're benefiting from it because you're in the band. So I don't think they're using anything now that's particularly I worked particularly hard on. So I don't, yeah, I'm not bothered about that particularly.
Yeah. Is it cool to see that legacy though, that like still going to use that branding type thing?
Well, I just when I see things, I go, it's not quite right. Like either the font's slightly wrong or they've missed bits that I would have added to it, and I'm like, okay, whatever. I mean, the Bloc Party logo is in Gill Sans. Well, that's the same font that the BBC is written in. It's a very like basic font, so I don't have any ownership over that.
No, I've been using it for thumbnails to be fair.
Yeah, yeah. Basic, basic.
No, yeah, fair enough. And then Umse Capita on Instagram says, "What happened in Brazil when Block Party did playback at a TV show? Is that a
Oh, I
story?"
love this story. I love this story. Um, I I've occasionally found footage of this. There is footage of it out there. It sometimes appears on YouTube, but sometimes isn't there. It's kind of a long story, but we went out to do some TV or award show or something, and I think it was the MTV Awards or something. But they neglected to tell us until we got there that we were playing on this show, but it was like a mime. And I don't know why we didn't know before we turned up to this award show that we were miming, which is not something we really enjoyed doing. There were moments where you'd do it, but the context of this was that we had a really fraught trip over. I think we flew into, it was basically like we were flying into Sao Paulo from London and then back. It's a long flight, and the Sao Paulo is just crazy. The airport was chaos, and the drive into town takes about 3 hours. And we were all kind of like in a bad mood that day. And there was an issue with Matt's first wife. He's remarried now, but his first wife, who was American, I think she got blocked from entering because she didn't have a visa. And so that's part of it. So Matt wasn't in the best of spirits because his wife had been blocked entry into Brazil, and we'd all had this rotten day. So when we got out on stage, just before we went out, we were told, uh, "Yeah, by the way, guys, this is a mime. You're not going to be playing live." And we were like, "What? You what?" So I think we were feeling very mischievous, and we were like, "Let's just mess about." Like effectively, like, fuck these guys, like, who cares? And so we started off playing. Matt had seemed to remember had drawn a moustache on his face for some reason. And then, like, I at one point jumped down into the crowd and I put my bass down at one point and stopped playing. And then we were just like, maybe I got onto the drums and started like messing around with that. And then Kelly started running around the room and they were booing at this point. And it was just like, us just messing with like, it's one of these things that happens when you've just like, you can't make it up. This sort of ridiculous situations you find yourselves in. I think we still had a sense of humor at that point, so we are like, wouldn't it be really funny if we just like completely messed this up? And that's what we did.
What's so Kelly was just running around while the song was playing.
He was running around the back of the building. I think he had a microphone, but I don't know. We were just messing around. It's just being silly billies.
Yeah, yeah.
It was fun. It definitely just dispelled all our like frustration and kind of annoyance at this day, and just like we can just have fun again. And like, we just didn't always play the game. Like we went, I think we were pretty good, and we turned up when it was needed. But there were times where we're just like, we're not doing it today. We're not playing.
Mate, you may as well have a laugh if you're going to be miming,
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah.
And in terms of TV performances, like Matt and particularly Russell said how nervous he was playing like Jools Holland. Um, I mean, that's become like a bit of a legendary performance. But
Right.
what are your memories of it, type thing?
It was it was a weird week because it was basically it was the week that I more or less kind of like was getting together with my wife in that week. we'd kind of communicated sort of remotely after we'd met, and then she came over to London that week. So it was a very busy week. It was the week that we filmed So Here We Are video, and we also had Jools Holland. So she was in the audience. I think Epworth was there. It was this moment, like it was our TV debut kind of moment. Yeah, and we were kind of like, we were tired but nervous and had a lot of nervous energy. And obviously you can see that in the performance, like just the tempo it goes at. But I remember it. I remember playing. I think we were in that at that point where we were as tight as we got, I think. Maybe probably like later were tighter and like not quite as frenetic, but still to be tight at that tempo. Yeah, I mean it's just I look back on it and go, that to me like ranks with like great performances that I've seen from later. Like there's that one of At the Drive-In playing, and like I think it's in that kind of same area, like the energy. So yeah, it's I mean it's surreal to kind of look at it and go, that's me doing that. But yeah, I mean we were just like we had loads on, and there's another thing like we're playing in France. I think it's called like Album de la Semaine, and the performances on there are like just as frenetic and in some ways like a bit more well mixed. So the thing with like the BBC is like it was always a bit of a crapshoot, like how they were going to mix the band. It never it didn't always kind of reflect how we thought we sounded. But yeah, I mean, it was just like that was the eye of the storm really, and had a lot going on, and we just that was the energy that we had at that point.
Yeah. Did you ever play Top of the Pops?
No, I think I can't remember where they were at with Top the Pops in 2005. I feel like it had finished by then. They did bring it back later, maybe, but I
I
don't.
mean, I just remember the Cribs saying they turned it down, so it must have been around at that point.
Yeah, it was the end of it. I think maybe it just got really naff at that point and nobody really wanted to do it. I don't know if maybe at that point they were back to like doing mimes or stuff, because in the 90s, I know that they made it sort of live again. And so
Hmm.
all the dance records that were meant to be performed live, they go out and the singer would be doing like these um like vocal performances. I know, yeah, I don't remember what was going on with the Top of the Pops. I know we
I
played
think it. Well, I
CDUK.
just Googled it. It finished July 2006, apparently.
Oh, okay. Well, I suppose we've been eligible. I just feel like probably it was just a bit naff at that point and bands weren't doing it. Like I know in the late 90s, I remember there was this episode where um there were a bunch of good bands playing, like Sebado playing on Top of the Pops, and that was sort of at its peak. I think it kind of later on it just didn't have the same cachet. It's probably why they got rid of it, you know.
Yeah. Did you mention CD UK then? Did you play that?
We did play CDUK, and I don't know if that's online, but again, that would have been a mime or like a live vocal. So the band's miming, but the singer's doing it live. And that was the one time that I met. That's my Chris Martin story, basically, is on the set of CDUK, and I guess Coldplay were playing or something. Chris Martin like introduced himself, and he was like, "I'm Chris. You won't like my band." Like he was very like, "I know everyone hates me." I was like, no, I don't mind Parachutes. That's a decent record. It's got a vibe. I don't know if I said that to him, uh, but I think there are people who were noticing, like when they came back with, I think, Speed of Sound after that, that
Hmm.
it owed somewhat to a song or two of ours. So maybe,
Okay, right.
yeah, maybe he was preemptively waiting for the brickbats from doing
Right. I'll have to listen to that again. It's a
that.
funny way to introduce a conversation, though. Like, you won't like my band, but
I think that's probably just what he's like. I'm sure he's just like very
yeah, yeah.
self-deprecating. You know, he wants to get in
That he's not big
Yeah,
time, yeah.
yeah. I'm a humble guy kind of thing. I'm sure, he seemed very nice. I'm
No,
sure he
yeah.
seemed very nice.
I've always had time for him after his cameo and extras. He's pretty funny in that.
Right.
But
I think wasn't he didn't he around that time he didn't he sing Dry Your Eyes for the Streets? And I think the story was that like Parlophone or somebody blocked him being on Dry Your Eyes, so like Mike Skinner had to sing it. But there is a version of Dry Your Eyes floating around out there that where Chris Martin does the lead on it.
yeah, that came out recently, I think, on social media, didn't it?
Okay, right.
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
follow the Chris Martin news.
Well, that is a mad collaboration, to be fair. And then just a few more, mate. I appreciate your time.
Yeah, of course.
I'll let you go soon. But a few more on Reddit quickly. Hispanic Dog says, you've already touched on this really, but why does Gordon use chords so much when playing, at least compared to his contemporaries? Gordon played chords quite a lot, especially on Silent Alarm and A Weekend in the City, and I'd love some insight behind that choice.
I mean, I think probably the answer to that is just Mogwai. I mean, like that I was obsessed with um like the early Mogwai compilation. I think it's called For Satin and Mogwai Young Team, and even some of the later stuff. Like Dominic, the way Dominic plays is kind of quite chordy, and for whatever reason, even though I mean, we already had two guitarists in Bloc Party, I felt like there was a space for that, and yeah, I mean, it was probably quite new to me, so I was just doing it more. Um, but definitely just from watching Mogwai and how Dominic played, kind of really sort of introduced this idea that, the bass could do a bit more than just like single notes.
Yeah, yeah. And then one from Venero one on Reddit. Any chance of future Drug Life releases? I
Oh,
really
wow.
enjoyed I really enjoyed the corporate body and Gordon getting reps on lead vocals.
Oh, okay. He's one of the few people that's heard that band. Yeah, that was just the band I did in Austin. Um, while I was there, I was sort of casting around trying to find some like dudes who'd be in a band, and it was an exercise in kind of writing for me because a lot of that record is just kind of stuff that I came up with, and I enjoyed the challenge of like singing and playing bass because that was like being the lead sort of singer. It's not something I'd done, but I that was kind of a nice challenge. I don't know if we'll do any more because it was very much like from that time when I was in Austin and I could go and rehearse with those guys. It would be the logistics of doing that would be quite difficult now, and that's why I'm doing a new thing.
Yeah, I think someone was asking the same about Young Legionnaire as well, but is it a logistics thing more than anything?
Yeah, I mean, I always say that there's a bunch of stuff written for a potential like third Young Legionnaire record, and actually Paul's around this month, and I've been meaning to like go and hang out and get some of them into shape. But he'll be whenever he's around for like a week, and you try and do something, and he's before you know it, he's disappeared again or off on tour. So the logistics of doing that are tricky. I mean, if Paul ever sort of moved back, which he's talked about, then it might become a thing again. But yeah, I mean, my sort of focus is on the Nun right now, and actually, it's like it's a really good place, and we're about to go on tour, and yeah, that's the thing right now. It feels good.
Yeah, yeah. And I did ask Matt the same question, but
Mm.
bit of a personal one really, but did Block Party and the success of it give you kind of a bit of freedom financially to carry on with the ideas and music that you wanted to
Yeah,
pursue?
for sure. Yeah. Um, I mean, we're very fortunate in that sense of that period where, you know, people still bought records, and but obviously, like these songs pop up in adverts and things, don't they? That doesn't hurt. I mean, I think like there was a time where I was a bit more sniffy about stuff like that, but you know, I'm not going to turn that down really at this point because streaming doesn't generate huge like numbers. I agree with Chapel Roan about like give artists a living wage. Um, uh, we've been fortunate in the sense that things that we wrote a while ago, 20 years ago, in some cases, have stood the test of time. You hear them on the radio, you hear them in clubs, you hear them on TV. I mean, that, yeah, that's been helpful in my case for sure.
Yeah, because I think Helicopter's on the current advert at the minute where a
Yeah.
young lad's playing it. Like,
Yes.
what's the process with that? Do you all have to sign off on it, or how does it work?
Um, I don't, yeah, I mean, I think more or less we're all co-writers on that stuff. So yeah, it goes through all of us.
Fair play. And then a really quite full-on one to finish on
Mm.
Twitter from Jimmy. Um, why do you think Kelly was always playing games within the band and creating unnecessary tension? And why did he always make OTT claims to the press, knowing the inevitable adverse impact on you and the other
Huh.
members?
I can't, yeah, there's a lot in that. I know that he had some insecurity at times. He enjoyed kind of telling like porkies to like journalists because after a while you it's very boring like that routine of like getting the same questions
Hmm.
over and over again. I mean, I've seen every kind of interview possible, and some people, they spend all you need to do is spend 10 minutes to Google a band or read their Wikipedia page. You get a lot of information that you don't have to ask in an interview. And yet, the amount of times I've sat in an interview and someone's gone, "What year did you form?" Like, what, how long have you been playing bass? Kind of really basic stuff. So it's kind of like you start tearing your hair out and you think like it's my job to play music. Like you could just do a bit of like preparation for this interview. And when you hear that like 10 times in a row, you start to dissociate and just start making stuff up. And we all done it. But I think with Kelly, they tended to like print it more. I mean, in terms of like, what was the beginning of the question?
Why do you think he was playing games within the band and creating unnecessary tension? Don't know if that's a fair question or not, but
Um, yeah, I don't think I would characterize it like that. I do think that it was a struggle. It became a struggle. Um, I think that for whatever reason, there were there were things about being in a band that Kelly seemed to struggle with personally. And his response was just to kind of go into his shell and just work more closely on the music and sort of obsess over the details more. And my experience of that was that I felt like I wasn't trusted as much to just be creative, that my role sort of diminished creatively, kind of more and more. I wouldn't say that that was playing games. It was just an unfortunate byproduct of this kind of maybe a slightly more paranoid way of like protecting the music and nursing it and being in control of it. Yeah, I mean, and then of course you go on tour and that's the bit that where it gets difficult and just being sort of thrown around the world and like being in people's faces sort of 24/7. It wears relationships down. It just does. It makes it harder to be around people. It's like so, I think it just got harder and harder to kind of to to function really. And you know, all of us had enough of it in different ways. And Matt was the first to call it and leave. I was soon behind. I think the other guys probably found some relief in that, but at the same time, I think it's probably still a bit of a struggle to come up with music for those guys. I mean, this is one of the reasons that I have moved on to new things, because I just want to make music that feels instinctive and is fun to do. And like right now, like just to turn up, plug in my bass and make like a racket and just like experience that amongst other musicians and just, it just feels really natural, and like there's no agonizing over like details. It's just like, can just be functional, functional humans making music. That was something that came very difficult in the end when, you know, at the end of my time in Bloc Party. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you see like these silent alarm shows and stuff, you don't feel you're missing out in any way type thing.
I mean, look, I do, yeah, it was a big kind of gulf in my life initially when I left, even though I knew I couldn't carry on doing it. It was becoming sort of like impossible to do, but it left a huge kind of gulf. And, but that's gone now. I mean, I do think, and this is one of the reasons why, playing with Matt is a lot of fun. Like, I do think, that there's a lot of good that would potentially come from playing those songs, but I don't miss it anymore, really. Like the struggle of getting to the top of the hill to play in that band. Like even though songs were good and the energy was could be amazing and it was so much fun to play those songs at times, like it was not worth it in the end. And I don't have an itch for that. Um, I want to play with Matt, and I think that'd be great if we are able to like write something new and go out on stage. Um, I've found like a really quick and easy and functional way to like play music in the way that I did in Block Party, in a collaborative way, because that's what I really enjoy. I'm a bass player. I join in um, without any of this kind of like really heavy stress that came with doing it. I found other outlets for that now. So that's I'm a lot happier doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, nice one. Then two to finish from me. Like, is there any particular high point that stands out from those early days of Block Party, and is there anything you do differently?
Huh. I mean, like, excuse me. The yeah, it was a lot of fun. Again, from when Matt joined, the first year, getting signed, going on tour, putting that record together was like win after win. Like it was so much fun. Playing, I think some of the other guys I mentioned this, playing Reading, the I'm guessing it was 2005. We headlined the like other stage at Reading. Such a high point. Like got such a buzz from doing that. That was definitely like a highlight of that whole period. I think it was kind of like at the end of that whole period, and we were just like, wow, we've done so much. We've gone to Japan and Australia and around the States, and we'd all met these amazing people and played some amazing shows and put out this record that nobody really expected. I mean, that's the thing. When we signed, I was quite happy to sign with Wichita, a small indie. Obviously, the Cribs were on that label, and we toured a lot with the Cribs. We felt quite an affinity with them. I don't think they expected, and we certainly didn't expect, at the end of that initial period in the summer where we made that record, I don't think anyone quite expected it to sound kind of like it did. We'd gone on such a level, and things like blue light and compliments, and it has so much sort of texture to it that we'd like achieve way more than I set out to do. My ambition when we started a band is like I'd like to do a pill session, and we were lucky enough to do a pill session when Peel was still alive. We were like in the last, I think, 10 or so bands that actually did Peel sessions. That was kind of like my ambition really. And then we did all these other things that were amazing. And so I think, that's why I don't ultimately kind of have that many regrets about walking away when I did, because I ticked so many of my boxes and we weren't suddenly going to do things that we hadn't achieved the year before. It's not like we were going to win a Grammy or an Oscar for best song, or suddenly like, we were like a little cult band that did something in that time that lasted. And you can't really hope for better than that, really.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's an excellent finishing point. I suppose they didn't really ask where to check out your stuff then. Is it just Instagram and all the usual?
Oh, well, for me, well, the numband.com, and I have a website, moakesy.com, where you can see some of my art and stuff. But yeah, I am on Instagram for my sins. And but I think, the Nun is real focus of what I'm doing right now, and it's a lot of fun. And we're touring, we're playing in a couple of weeks, so there's always a gig, and it's nice to be out doing stuff again, because I didn't play for like a few years after Austin. I was dormant for a while, so it's nice to be, I still got my health out playing again.
Yeah, I suppose I didn't ask you about like how you see it for new bands now. And I think I've seen you post a few things about Spotify, and you're like your current band's not on Spotify, right?
Yeah, I mean, we'll be on Spotify at some
Okay.
point. Um, it just at the mo just because we just like ramping slowly into it, and start with like a 4-track EP, Bandcamp only, little shows, just keep it quite, you know, sort of on the down low. I mean, it's not to everyone's taste. It's very like it's noisy and slightly weird and discordant, and I get that some people that's not for everyone, but at the same time, like we've had some really good there's a Rolling Stone UK like piece today that's gone out. Like people get it, people seem to be into it, and so it feels like it's gaining momentum. And yeah, I expect that at some point it will be on Spotify and it will be a little more overground, let's say. But it's nice to just do it in a sort of grown up way and just not have to like constantly be playing the game, because that's I've I always say I've been around the block a few times, and like I'm only doing this still because I love doing it. I enjoy the experience of it, and like we don't have to like you know play the big corporate game. We can just do it at our own pace and do it to suit us. That's where I'm at.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if Bloc Party was starting now, what do you think the main challenges would be, do you think, compared to back in the day?
Mhm. Um, just standing out really. Um, there's so much noise, and like obviously we used to like consuming like clips of things, and like to people, I still listen to records, but like people just listen to like snippets of things. I think just cutting through that, um yeah, I think I don't know how people do it. I mean, it helps if you're good, but like that's still subjective. I don't know. Yeah, I have no idea. um the whole context would be different, right? I mean, that's the thing. At the time, you know that it was there was originality to that. Like it wasn't something you necessarily came across, like this sort of post-punk, like energetic stuff, you know, person of color fronting it, like that was still, that was not a norm. And for lots of reasons, that is more normal now. It should be more normal. Uh, yeah, I don't know how you cut through in these times of kind of like mass noise.
Hmm. And in terms of people like Spotify, do you think they need to change how things work, kind of thing?
Ugh.
Or how do you feel about all that?
Oh my God.
Separate podcast again, I suppose.
Yes, they should pay artists fairly. They should, yeah, I mean, it's a pittance. It's just, it's kind of an insult how they pay on Spotify. I think Bandcamp, the nice thing about releasing only on Bandcamp, you actually see like the people buying it, and you can kind of take that to the bank effectively. Like you can see how much you've earned off it. Like with Spotify, that's so opaque, and it's opaque for a reason because they don't want you to see kind of what you're earning. They want you to kind of use it like a free resource. Um, yeah, I think there are. I mean, I get this feeling there is the backlash is starting to kind of gain momentum now. I mean, like, look at what Elon Musk is doing. Like, these aren't good guys. These people never had good intentions, in my opinion, and that's just being shown now. So, you know, now we can all see it. I think people can visualize something different at last, I think. And there are things that not aren't even Bandcamp that could, be actually owned, co-owned, cooperatively owned by musicians, and they actually take the money that people spend on it at home. That's the real model. So yeah, I hope that there's a bit of a change there. I don't know. I mean, things are going to get worse before they get better, and that's true of a lot of what's going on in the world, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, Kate Nash, I saw she recently pointed out how much profit these people are making, like Live Nation and obviously Spotify, but I just didn't realize how much. She described it as like a growing economy type thing for them.
Yeah, and I mean, it's become part of the tech rush, you know. Like there are platforms that have come along that have tried to buck that, like especially when it comes to Ticketmaster, but they ultimately the tech kind of principle is that you sell that on. So eventually any of those smaller kind of platforms or things get sold on to the big guys. Yeah, it's obscene, really. It's I think it's like the 1%. Think of it like the 1% on. There's a case for musicians to say like 1% of the artists make money off streaming platforms, and the rest don't. And so Occupy music is my final message there.